Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Ijumafa. So today I'll be taking on how I made this gown. So this is an off-shoulder gathered gown. So if this is something you like to wear, please definitely keep watching and let's get started. So I'll be making use of this Ankara fabric for the gown, and I'll be making use of this satin fabric for the strap. So we're going to start with the upper part, which is drafting of the half-length bodies. So this is going to be an off-shoulder half-length bodies. So I've drawn out the vertical measurement here. I also went ahead to add ½ inch throughout the vertical measurement. So this is to take care of turning with the lining so that we don't have shortage after sewing. So this line here is going to be the satin line or the shoulder line, and this is the bust point, this is the under bust, this is the waist, and this is the seam allowance of ½ inch. So from the shoulder to the bust point is supposed to be 10 inches plus ½ inch. I have 10.5 inches. From the shoulder to the under bust is supposed to be 13.5 inches. I have 14 inches, and from the shoulder to the waist is supposed to be 15.5 inches, but I have 16 inches. So if you have a fully drafted half scale bodies, you can make do with it. So you just modify the half scale bodies and you'll be achieving the same thing. So if you're working with a half scale bodies, you know that you'll be having a drop, which is for the shoulder slant before you have your chest line. So instead of working with that chest line, you'll be going upwards with about 1 inch. So this is to reduce unnecessary exposure. So I'm going to start off by imputing the armhole depth. So the armhole depth I'm working with is 8 inches. So I'm going to mark 8 inches here, and I'll connect this with a straight line. So I'm going to label this as chest line. So having done that, we need to now indicate how off we want our top to be. So for the off shoulder, I want to work with 5 inches off. So at this point here, I'm going to mark 5 inches. So the 5 inches is going to be for the off shoulder. So I'm going to draw a straight line. So this line will now serve as the new neckline. So this place, we are going to be cutting it off. So the next thing now is to impute the dart. And to do that, we need to first of all mark our dart leg. And how do we achieve that? We need to mark the nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2, or the bust part measurement divided by 2. So the bust part measurement is 7 inches divided by 2 will give me 3.5 inches. And I'll be adding a ½ inch seam allowance. So that will be 4 inches. So at this line here, I'm going to mark 4 inches all the way down. So the next thing now is to impute the dart. So at this center piece here, I'm going to be marking ½ inch. So at the under bust, I'll be marking ½ inch, and on the waist, I'll mark ½ inch. And at the side here, I'm going to take a dart of 1.5 inches. And at this side here, I'm going to also take the dart of 1.5 inches. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to take my ruler and connect to get a straight line. So after imputing the dart, the next thing now is to come to the bust point. So at the bust point here, I'm going to go upwards by 1 inch and downwards by 1 inch. So I'm going upwards by 1 inch and coming downwards by 1 inch to eliminate any form of funny look or sharpness at the bust point. So the next thing I'll be doing now is to use my cuff to get that bustier effect, or you can call it the cuff. So that is where the bust is going to be sitting. So the next thing now is to take the dart at the top here on the neckline. So I'm going to be taking in 3/4 inch on both sides. The next thing now is to connect from this dart to this 1 inch above the bust point, and from this dart to the 1 inch above the bust point. So having done all this, the next thing now is to impute the horizontal measurement. So on this chest line, I'm going to impute 1/4 of the bust circumference. So 1/4 of the bust circumference is 10 inches. And the dart I have here, because I'll be cutting it off, I need to replace this dart so I don't have a shortage. So this dart here is ½ inch. So that will be 10.5 inches. So 10.5 inches places me here. So this is 10.5 inches. So now, by the time you cut this out, you need to join this panel and this panel together. So you'll be having a shortage of 1 inch. So I also need 1 inch for sewing allowance or joining allowance. Then you also need your seam allowance. So you can work with 2 inches. But if you're a beginner, it's advisable to use from 2.5 to 3 inches. So remember I said I need 1 inch to join the panels together, and I'll be working with about 2.5 inches. So in total, I need 3.5 inches. So I'm also going to impute 3.5 inches here. So this is where my 3.5 inches is. So on the underbust, 1/4 of the underbust circumference is 8.5 inches. Now I will need to replace this dart. So in total, this dart will be giving me 2 inches. So 2 inches added to 8.5 inches will give me 10.5 half inches. So 10.5 inches places me here. So remember we used 3.5 here. So I'm also going to impute the same thing on the underbust and the waist. So 1 inch is for joining back the panels together. That's the sewing allowance. And 2.5 inches is the seam allowance that we need to have as extra. So I'm going to mark 3.5 inches this way. So for the waistline, quarter of the waist circumference I'm working with is 9 inches. So I'm marking 9 inch here. Now I need to add this 2 inches that I'll be cutting off, plus 2 inches, then plus 3.5 inches allowance. So the next thing I'll be doing now is to connect the markings. So having done this, the next thing now is to work on the neckline. So we need to impute the neckline, and with the neckline we're going to be able to draft out the armhole. So because this is an off shoulder, we cannot work with the exact shoulder measurement. So for an off shoulder, you will need to subtract 1.5 inches or 2 inches from half of the shoulder measurement you're working with. So if the shoulder measurement you're working with is 8 inches, subtract 1.5 inches or 2 inches from the shoulder measurement. Better still, another method you could use is placing your tape rule from one strap to the other strap to get the measurement you'll be working with. So for this, I'll be working with half of the shoulder measurement, which is 7 inches. So half of the shoulder measurement minus 1.5 inches. So that will give me 5.5 inches. So I want this neckline to be 5.5 inches. So my 5.5 inches places me here. So by the time I take away this dart, which is 1.5 inches from 5.5 inches, I'll be left with 4 inches. So I still need to make up for this neckline so that the neckline will be giving me the exact neckline I want to work with. So I'm going to replace this dart, which is 1.5 inches. So I need to mark the 1.5 inches here, and I also need a 1 inch sewing allowance so that by the time I cut this off and I join them together again, I wouldn't be having a shortage. So the 1.5 inches that I want to replace plus 1 inch sewing allowance, so that will give me 2.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 2.5 inches here. So from this 2.5 inches, I'm going to now connect to the chest line to form the armhole. So now we're practically done with the front panel. So I'll be marking this as X. So these are the parts I'll be cutting out. So I'll be cutting out this dart and this dart. For the neckline, you could choose any neckline of your choice, but I'll be working with a straight neckline. So I'm going to go ahead now and cut this out. So guys, after cutting out the front panel, this is how it looks like. So sorry for the fold I'm having on the paper. So this is going to be on fold when you're cutting because this is the center piece. This is for the center and this is for the side. So you'll be cutting two of this. So you have one for the left and one for the right side. So when you're cutting off, so please do not forget to notch this point. So you need to notch the bust point, you need to notch the underbust. It will enable you align them properly. So for the back panel, I've gone ahead to impute the vertical measurement, just like I did for the front, and this is the zipper allowance. I also went ahead to impute a 1/2 inch sewing allowance on the vertical measurement. So this is the chest line, the bust point, and the waist. So for the back piece, I did not add a seam allowance or joining allowance here. So for the front panel, I added a 1/2 inch joining allowance, so that we'll be joining it to the lower part. But for this back piece, I wouldn't be joining any allowance. I'm just going to stop or use the original waist measurement. So reason being that most times after sewing your bustier, you will notice that the bustier tends to now look shorter, which is the front piece, the front panel, now looks shorter than the back panel. So I'm doing this so that by the time I'm done sewing, both the front and the back panel will tend to rhyme or will be the same length. So this applies for just when you're sewing a bustier. So if you're not sewing a bustier and using just a waist dart for the front panel, you'll be needing to add your joining or sewing allowance. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to go ahead and mark my off shoulder. That's how off I want it to be. So I'm going to repeat the same thing like I did for the front, 5 inches and 5 inches, and connect with a straight line. So this line will now be our new neckline. So we're going to be cutting this off. So the next thing now is to impute the dart. So half of the bust pan measurement is 3.5 inches plus 1/2 inch seam allowance. So that will be 4 inches. And I'm going to mark 4 inches here on the bust point. So you will notice that we're only working with the chest line the bust point and the waist for the back panel. So we would not be needing the under bust for the back. So at this bust point, I'm going to step upwards by 1 inch. So I'm going to connect. So this is where the dart is going to start from and it's going to end here. So I'm going to use my ruler to make a straight line. So the next thing I'll be doing now is to take in the dart. So I'm going to take 1/2 inch on both sides, 1/2 inch here and 1/2 inch here. So I'll be connecting to this point here. After imputing the dart, the next thing now is to impute the horizontal measurement. So on the chest line, I'm going to impute 1/4 of the bust circumference. So 1/4 of the bust circumference I'm working with is 10 inches. So 10 inches plus 2.5 inches seam allowance. So I'll be adding 2.5 inches. So that is 12.5 inches. So that's here. And on the waist, I'm going to impute 1/4 of the waist circumference. So 1/4 of the waist circumference I'm working with is 9 inches. Now I'm going to replace this dart. So this dart is 1 inch in total. So plus 1 inch for the dart and my 2.5 inches seam allowance. So I'm going to connect this marking. So having done this, the next thing now is to work on the neckline, and I need to impute the neck width. So like I established for the front, the neck width is 5.5 inches I want to work with. So I'm going to mark 5.5 inches here. So from this 5.5 inches, I'll be connecting to this point. So if you want your dart to get up to the neckline here, so means that you'll be cutting out this place up until this point. You need to add a sewing allowance, just like I did for the front panel, before you connect to the chest line. So I just want to make use of a waist dart. So my dart leg is not getting up to here. I am not cutting this out. So I'm going to connect from this 5.5 inches to the chest line. So having gotten this, the next thing I'm going to do now is just to modify the zipper area. So my zipper allowance is 1.5 inches, and on this waistline I'm going to come inward with 1/2 inch. So I'll mark 1/2 inch here. This is to eliminate zipper bulge. So I'm going to connect this way. Just connect, creating a dart at the zipper area. So this is a zip dart. So I'm going to be cutting this off. So by the time you're done sewing, this is going to eliminate any form of zipper bulge. So I'm going to come at the waist here and add back the 1/2 inch which I just took away from here to avoid shortage. So I'm going to connect like this from this 1/2 inch back to the chest line. So this is how it's going to be. So now I'm going to cut this out. So guys, this is how the back panel looks like. So when transferring to your fabric, you'll be cutting out this in 2 places. So I've gone ahead to use my pattern paper to cut out the Ankara fabric and the lining. So this is for the front panel. So this is the center front and these are the 2 sides for the front, and this is the back panel. So the next thing I'll be doing now is to couple the panels together, and I'll be starting with the front panels. So on my Ankara panels, I went ahead to chalk them. So this is to enable me differentiate the wrong side from the right side. So I'll be making use of this lightweight wording to pad my front panels. So I'll be placing the center front this way, stopping at the under bust. So I'm going to cut this out, but I'll be reducing this wording with 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. So this is to reduce bulkiness or thickness at the neckline when sewing. So to cut the sides, I'll be repeating the same process. I'm going to cut this all out. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to give it a curve to shape it and also to avoid wording at the armhole here. So I'm going to cut it out this way. So this is how it looks like. So I have 2 of this, one for the left side and one for the right side. So after cutting out, I went ahead to indicate this. So I marked it to tell me that this is facing up so that I know where the wording should fit. Sometimes after cutting the wording, it could get confusing. So the next thing to do now is to make sure that the gummy part, which is the shiny part, will face the wrong side of your fabric. So this is how it's supposed to be. So making sure that it stops at the under bust also. So the same thing applies to this side panel. After doing that as a beginner, you will now go ahead and use your hot iron to press the wording down. So after doing that, once your wording is sticking to your fabric, the next thing to do now is to pick this up you have to join them right side facing each other and sew it down with your sewing allowance of 1/2 inch. So if you're in a hurry or you don't have a light to press your wadding down, another way you can do this is to hold them down properly with your pins. Then you take them this way, right side facing each other. Just make sure that the waddings are set properly, they align properly, and you sew it up with your sewing allowance. You'll be doing the same thing to this side. So I'm going to take it to my machine and sew them up, and I'll show you how it looks like. So after joining the panels together, I have the back and this is the front. And for the back piece, I went ahead to sew up the dart on both sides, and this is how it looks like on the right side. So this is the back panel, and for the front panel, I went ahead to join them together. This is how the inside looks like, and I use my iron to press down the wadding, and this is how it looks like on the outside. So on this front panel, you notice that this place isn't straight, so the sides are kind of bending. So I'm going to modify this, or simply just trimming this off. The only thing you need to do is to use the center as your guide. You're going to place your ruler this way, using this center as a guide. So you can see at the end like this, you're going to place your ruler this way, then you cut this excess out. So making sure that your ruler is straight, just cut out or you chalk it out first. So you repeat the same thing to this side. So you place your ruler at the end of this center piece, making sure that your hand is straight, and whatever you have here as your excess, you cut it out. So having trimmed out this excess here, I just have to repeat the same thing on the lining so that the lining and the main fabric will correspond. So I've cut out this piece of fabric which I'll be using for the strap. So this is 11 inches in length and the width is 3/4 of an inch. So I cut out 2 inches, I folded it into 2, and after sewing, I was left with 3/4 of an inch. So for the length, remember the back and the front is 5 inches that I took off. So that will give me a total of 10 inches. And I have 1 inch for the seam allowance. So 1/2 inch to join to the front panel and 1/2 inch to join to the back panel. So that will give me 11 in total. So I'll be placing the strap this way. I'll do the same thing this way, dropping it this way, and I'm going to take my lining. So the right side of my lining facing the right side of the fabric, I'm going to place it this way. So making sure that the seam allowance on the lining matches with the seam allowance on the fabric. Now I'm going to sew up with about 1/4 of an inch, sew up the armhole. I'll sew up the neckline, sew up this armhole also. So once I'm done sewing, I'll have to notch the sides I've sewn, then I'll open it up and soft stitch. Then once I'm done with that also, I will now sew up the 2 sides. So I'm done attaching the strap on the front panel, and this is how it looks like. So to attach the strap on the back panel, I'm going to bring the front panel this way. So the strap is going to sit here just like I did for the front. So once I place it this way, I'll introduce the lining. So I'm going to face the lining, right side of the lining facing the right side of the fabric. I'll place it this way. So I'll go sew it up with my sewing allowance, sew up the neckline and sew up the zipper allowance. Once I'm done, I will notch, soft stitch and flip it over to the other side. So I'll be repeating the same process on this other panel too. I'll place it this way. I'll place the lining on top of it, sew it up, and I'll show you how it looks like. So after I was done sewing, the next thing I went ahead to do was to close up the side. So this is how the upper part of the gown looks like. So the next thing now is to move over to the lower part of the gown, which is the gathered part. For the lower part of the gown, I have this rectangle which I'll be using for the gathered part. So when I open this up, I have 38, almost 38 inches by 28 inches in length. The full length I'm working with is 42.5 inches. So I subtracted the half length, which is 15.5 inches, thereby giving me 26.5 inches left. Then I added a half inch to join to the waist, which will give me 27 inches, and 1 inch for the hemming allowance at the bottom part. So in total, I have 28 inches. And the way I cut this out, I use ×2 of the waist circumference. So you use either ×2 of the waist circumference or ×2.5. It depends on how full you want it to be. So what I did was I used 36 inches, which was the waist circumference, plus the zipper allowance of 1.5 inches. So that's giving me 37.5 inches in total. So I have 37.5 inches ×2. So this is on fold. So that's what I'm going to be using for the lower part of the gown. So to make the gather part of the gown, I'm going to pick up one end here. I'll take it to the machine and make a loose stitch from this end to the other end. So I have this lining piece here, which I already cut out. So this lining piece, for the length, it is 3 inches shorter than the main piece, which I want to use for the lower part of the gown. Also, I've gone ahead to hem the lower part of this lining. You could go ahead to hem it or use your interlocking machine to weave the lower part of the lining. So So for the width of the lining, I made use of 60 inches. So it's not really advisable to use exactly the same thing you'll be using as the main fabric. So this is to avoid bulkiness at the waist area. But if you want yours to be bulky, you can go ahead and use exactly the same thing on the main fabric. So I'll just advise that you use something a little above your waist circumference, which will give room for you to walk freely. So to make the gather, I've gone ahead to make 2 loose stitches at the top here. So I have 2 loose stitches. So the reason for making 2 loose stitches is so that in case the upper one breaks or the lower one breaks, I can move over to the next one. So to be on the safe side, when you want to make your gather stitch, always try to make 2 stitches, 2 line stitches, so that when you're pulling and one breaks, you can move over to the next stitch and use it to form your gathers. So I'm going to pick up a thread this way. I just need to pick one thread. So I'm just going to pull like this. So I'll keep pulling until I get the desired waist circumference I want to work with. So I'm done making up the gather. So this is how it looks like at this end, and this is how it looks like at this end, still maintaining the thread on both ends. So I didn't cut out the thread. It's advisable to leave the thread till you're done sewing, then you can go ahead and cut it out. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to introduce the top and close up on the waistline. So I forgot to mention that I notched the midpoint of the lower part before I started pulling to get the gather effect. So I'm going to look for where the knot is, and I have my midpoint here notch also. So I'm going to match it notch to notch, align it that way, and I'll sew it up with 1/2 inch as my sewing allowance. I'll do the same thing this way to sew it up with 1/2 inch. So I'm done attaching the upper part to the lower part of the gown. So we're almost done sewing the gown. So this is how it looks like at this end, and this is how it looks like at this end. So the next thing to do now is to turn it over and use the lining to finish up. So I'm going to turn it to the wrong side this way. So to finish up with the lining, I'm going to place it the right side of the lining. So because I hem this, I'll be working with the right side of the lining this way, placing it at this beginning here, and I'm going to keep on sewing. So I'll just keep pleating it for it to for the waist to accommodate it, and I'll pleat it till I get to this other end. So once I'm done pleating, I'll flip it this way. So by the time I'm done, it's going to cover up this untidy waist. So once I finish that, I will now go over to the side, this side. I will now sew up the lining to the Ankara piece. I'll do the same thing for this side. So I'm going to sew up the side this way. So after sewing it down on both sides, I will now close up the gown at the back and also attach the zipper. So guys, this is how it looks like after I was done fixing the lining. So I just thought to share how the finishing part looks like before I'll go ahead and close it up. So guys, this is the final look of the outfit, and this is how the back looks like. So you can see that the back, I do not have any zipper bolt at the back. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe.